Carl Jung spent 40 years inside the human mind. He sat across from murderers, saints, broken mothers, and brilliant men who had lost themselves completely. And woven through all of it, through all the case files and the late nights and the breakthroughs, a pattern kept emerging. A pattern so consistent, so precise, that it reads less like a clinical observation and more like a warning. He found that most people destroy themselves not through failure, not through bad luck, not even through their worst enemies. They destroy themselves by talking too much, not in the way you think, not gossip, not complaining, something quieter, something that reaches right into the center of who you are and slowly hollows you out, one conversation at a time. Across his clinical work, his theoretical writing, and his own psychological journals, Jung developed 4 core principles for protecting the interior life. He never packaged them as a numbered list. But they are there, embedded in his work on the shadow, on psychic energy, on the persona, and on the unconscious. 4 distinct psychological territories that, when carelessly exposed, trigger damage that is slow, invisible, and very difficult to undo. Today, you're going to understand what those 4 principles are, why violating them is so psychologically costly, and what happens to the people who spend a lifetime ignoring them. This is not a feel-good lesson. This is a disturbing truth about the way your mind works, and the way other minds work against you. Let's begin. The first thing you should never reveal to anyone is your shadow. Jung spent more time studying the shadow than almost any other part of the human mind. He described it as the hidden basement of the personality, the part of you that holds everything you have been told is unacceptable, the rage you suppress, the jealousy you pretend not to feel, the selfish thoughts, the dark fantasies, the fear of your own cruelty. All of it lives in the shadow. Most people spend their entire lives pretending the shadow does not exist, and that, Jung said, is the first and most catastrophic mistake. Jung wrote that if an inferiority is conscious, a person always has a chance to correct it, but if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. It just grows, gets denser, more dangerous, more in control. The shadow does not want to stay hidden. It leaks out in mood swings and unexplained anger and choices that seem to come from nowhere. It finds a way to express itself, whether you want it to or not. Now, consider a behavioral profile that appears repeatedly across psychological case studies. A man, deeply introverted, carrying wounds from an early life of criticism and shame. He had the kind of shadow most people carry, but few examine. Dark thoughts, a capacity for cruelty he had never acted on but feared, deep envy of people who seemed effortlessly confident. He decided to open up. He told his closest friends about these inner shadows in detail. What happened next is a near-perfect illustration of what Jung warned about. His friends did not thank him for trusting them. Within weeks, 2 of them began treating him differently. One started making jokes aimed precisely at the fears he had confessed. Another held the information over him in arguments, quietly, but in a way that made him feel permanently exposed. He came to understand what Jung had documented decades earlier. When you reveal your shadow to someone who has not done their own inner work, you do not receive understanding. You give them a weapon. This is a distinction Jung made throughout his clinical work. He was not against revealing the shadow. He believed that confession, bringing the shadow into the light of a trusted or therapeutic relationship, was the first and most necessary step toward integration. The shadow cannot heal in isolation. It must be witnessed, but by someone capable of receiving it without projecting their own darkness back onto you. The danger Jung documented was not confession itself. It was indiscriminate confession. Sharing your shadow with casual acquaintances, with people who have never confronted their own basement, does not heal it. It simply hands it to someone who does not know what to do with it. Jung called what happens next shadow projection. When you expose your darkness to someone who has not faced their own, they cannot handle what they see. It reminds them of things buried in themselves. Rather than sitting with that discomfort, they project it back onto you. You become, in their eyes, the thing they fear in themselves. But here is where it gets truly disturbing. Shadow projection does not stay between two people. The person who received your confession begins to tell others, framing it as concern. Those people begin to see you through the projector's lens. Suddenly, you are the difficult one. You simply showed someone your basement, and they turned it into a story about the whole house. Jung called this the scapegoat phenomenon. The person who reveals their shadow too freely becomes the container for everything a group cannot acknowledge about itself. You stop being a person. You become a function. The lesson is this: your shadow is yours to integrate. It is yours to examine, to sit with, to understand. It is not for sharing with the general public. Becoming your true self requires you to face the shadow first. You do not bring a half-formed darkness into social spaces and expect healing. You get destruction instead. Jung observed that the more someone represses their shadow, the blacker and denser it becomes. The solution is not to perform your darkness for others. It is to find the rare person or the right setting capable of receiving it honestly, and to do that work there. The first principle: protect your shadow from the uninitiated. Share it only where it can be genuinely witnessed and integrated. The second thing you should never reveal to anyone is your future intentions and your deepest goals. This one is counterintuitive. Society tells you to declare your goals. Say them out loud, write them down, tell your friends, post them on the internet, build accountability, build momentum. Jung's framework of psychic energy offers a compelling reason to question all of that, and modern research has since arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion. A researcher named Peter Gollwitzer at New York University conducted experiments that shook the psychology world. He found that when people shared their identity-based goals publicly, they actually did less work to achieve them. Law students who publicly committed to working harder quit earlier than those who kept their commitments private. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. The act of announcing what you wanted to achieve gave the brain a premature sense of completeness. The drive to pursue it faded. Jung did not write about dopamine or social media, but his theory of psychic energy, what he called libido, points towards something strikingly parallel. Before you misread that word, Jung used libido to mean something far broader than it does today. It was the raw life force powering all human action, the internal hunger that drives you toward your purpose. Jung described this energy as water. It needs a gradient, a direction, and it needs to be contained long enough to build real pressure. When it finds an outlet in social validation before being converted into actual work, it dissipates. The tank empties, not because you lost discipline, because the psychological mechanism that generates urgency had already been satisfied by words. The Jungian word for this is tension, not anxiety, not stress, the productive pressure between who you are now and who you are becoming. That tension is the engine of transformation. Talk about your future self too eagerly, and you release the pressure. The engine dies. Consider a composite illustration drawn from patterns documented across behavioral psychology studies. A woman with a vision so clear, it almost frightened her. She was going to build something. She was going to change her life. She told everyone. She described it in vivid detail, and receive their encouragement and their nods. 6 months later, she had not started. The desire felt just as real, but the urgency was gone. The hunger had been fed by words instead of action. This is what Jung observed across patient after patient. The person who announced their transformation was almost never the one who completed it. The quiet ones, those who said nothing and simply changed, were the ones who arrived on the other side. And there is something even more unsettling that most people miss entirely. It is not just that announcing your goal drains the energy to pursue it. It is that the audience's response reshapes the goal itself. When you tell people what you are trying to become, they form an opinion about whether it suits you. Even when supportive, their version of your goal is smaller than yours. They see it from the outside, and if you keep sharing, you begin to see it from the outside too. You begin to manage the goal for public consumption instead of building it from the inside out. Your vision is a living thing. It grows in the dark. Pull it into the light too early and it does not grow stronger. It adapts to the approval of people who have no real stake in whether you succeed or fail. The second principle: protect your psychic energy by keeping your deepest intentions private until they have been converted into action. The third thing you should never reveal to anyone is your acts of virtue and your quiet goodness. This one cuts deeper than the others. It asks you to do good things and then say nothing, not to hint at them, not to let them come up in conversation, not to post about them, not to feel cheated when no one sees. Jung studied what he called the persona, the mask we wear in public, the curated version of ourselves we offer to the world. It is not entirely fake, but it is selective. When someone becomes too identified with their persona, when the mask becomes the whole identity, the authentic self begins to disappear. Consider what happens when you perform your virtue publicly. You help someone. You make a sacrifice. You do something genuinely difficult because it is right. And then you tell people. The response comes. They admire you. The persona gets polished. But something happens on the inside. The soul, the true interior life Jung believed was the only thing worth developing, recognizes the performance. It knows the difference between genuine virtue and the performance of virtue. Each time you perform instead of practice, the gap between the persona and the true self grows wider. There is also a neurological dimension. When we announce our goodness and receive approval, the brain releases its reward before the inner work is complete. The growth stops. The transformation never deepens. A composite portrait drawn from well-documented behavioral patterns illustrates this precisely. A man who devoted himself to being seen as charitable, kind, and morally serious. He gave to good causes. He was known for his generosity. He mentioned it often, in the careful way that people who know they should not brag still manage to bring it up. And his actual private behavior grew more and more inconsistent with the person he presented in public. Not through dramatic collapse, through slow, quiet erosion. The more he performed goodness, the less he felt it. Jung called this identification with the persona, the process by which someone becomes so completely merged with their public mask that they lose contact with their actual moral standing. The image replaces the reality. And here is what should unsettle you most. Jung observed that identification with the persona is invisible from the inside. The person experiencing it does not feel like a fraud. They feel righteous. The mask has become so convincing that even its owner cannot see through it. The gap between who they appear to be and who they actually are keeps widening. But they never feel it widening. They only feel the warmth of the applause. Jung's warning was precise. When a person believes they are their public mask, they lose touch with the interior life that generates real moral development. The persona, however admirable it appears, is not the self. It is a face, and a face cannot grow. There is an ancient warning embedded in nearly every wisdom tradition. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Do not invite witnesses to your virtue. Jung gave this warning a psychological foundation. When the good you do is witnessed and praised, it feeds the persona. When it goes unseen, it feeds the actual self, and only one of those things transforms you. The third principle: protect your virtue from performance. What is done in private develops the self. What is done for an audience develops only the mask. The fourth thing you should never reveal to anyone is your inner intuition, your private knowing, the quiet voice that has never been wrong. This is the most subtle of the four, and in many ways, the most important. Jung spent years studying what he called the introverted intuitive type, people who seemed to receive information from a place that could not be explained. They walked into rooms and immediately knew something was wrong. They met people and felt what no one else noticed. They had gut reactions that most people dismissed. He documented these individuals across decades of clinical work, and he observed something disturbing. Trying to explain their intuition to others did not clarify it. It destroyed it. Here is why. Your deepest intuitive perception belongs to what Jung called the unconscious, the vast part of the mind that operates below language. It speaks in images, feelings, and sudden flashes of knowing. It does not translate well into words. The moment you try to explain it, you force it through a filter. It was not designed to fit. Consider a narrative illustration based on psychological patterns, documented across cases of highly intuitive individuals. A woman who simply knew things, not mystically, in a practical, bone-deep way. She knew when someone was lying. She knew when a situation was about to turn. She knew when someone in her life was about to betray her. For a long time, she trusted this knowing. She made quiet decisions based on what she felt, never explaining herself. She was rarely wrong. Then she began sharing her perceptions. She told people what she sensed. She tried to make others understand. The responses were not kind. She was called paranoid, dramatic, too sensitive. Over time, she began to doubt herself. She softened her perceptions. She bent them to fit what other people would accept. Her intuition, once razor-sharp, became confused. Not because it had failed, because she had diluted it with too many voices. Jung observed this same erosion in patient after patient. The introverted intuitive type suffers a unique kind of damage when they bring their perceptions to an audience not equipped to receive them. The audience does not need to be hostile. It simply needs to be unconscious of its own inner world. And most people are. Jung had a specific term for what happens next. He borrowed it from the anthropologist Lucien Levy-Bruhl and made it central to his own psychology. He called it participation mystique. It describes a state in which the psychological boundary between self and other dissolves. A person can no longer tell where they end and someone else begins. For Jung, this was the specific danger facing highly perceptive individuals who constantly submitted their inner knowing to outside judgment. The repeated act of asking others to validate what you privately sense gradually erodes the boundary that makes you a distinct person. You stop being a separate observer. You become part of the crowd's consensus about what is real. When you expose your intuition repeatedly and invite others to judge it, something shifts structurally. Their skepticism does not just influence you. At the level Jung was describing, it begins to replace you. Over time, you cannot locate your own signal anymore because you have spent years tuning it down to match people who were never equipped to receive it. Your intuition is not a theory to be debated. It is a signal from the deepest part of your mind. Signals are weakened by interference. Every time you bring your quiet knowing into a crowded conversation and ask people to validate it, you introduce interference. You tune your own signal down. Trust what you know. Keep it private until it has ripened into action. The fourth principle: protect your inner knowing from audiences that cannot receive it without dissolving your boundary from their doubt. Now we arrive at the most disturbing part, because what Jung observed across years of clinical work was not just individual harm. What he observed was a systemic process by which people gave themselves away, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. They arrived at his office not through a single dramatic trauma. They arrived through 1,000 small acts of overexposure. They had shared their darkness and had it weaponized. They had announced their dreams and watched the energy leak out. They had performed their goodness until it became a costume. They had explained their knowing until they stopped knowing anything. And they were confused. That is what struck Jung most. They could not identify the moment it happened. There was no catastrophe, no single betrayal, just a gradual sense that something essential was missing, that a version of themselves they could dimly remember, the one that burned with certainty and private vision, seemed very far away. Jung called this the loss of soul, not in a religious sense, in a precise psychological one. The soul was the living interior of a person, the part that dreamed and raged and hoped and perceived. When systematically exposed and eroded by collective opinion, it did not disappear. It went quiet. It retreated inward, waiting. Jung was not pessimistic about this condition. He believed that individuation, the work of becoming a whole person, could begin at any point in a life. The loss of soul was not a permanent sentence. It was a signal that the interior, life, had been neglected too long, and that reclaiming it was now urgent. Prevention, Jung noted, was simply less costly than repair, and the result was always the same: a kind of psychological hollowing, a person still functional on the outside, but something missing from the inside, some essential core that had not been taken. It had been given away, one casual overshare at a time. He called the answer to this sacred silence, not the silence of hiding, not the silence of fear, not the cold, defended silence of someone who trusts no one, something altogether different. Sacred silence is active. It is chosen. It is the decision to hold your interior life with care. Your inner world is not public property, not your shadow, which must be integrated carefully and selectively, not your intentions, which need the pressure of privacy to become real, not your quiet goodness, which grows stronger unseen, not your knowing, which sharpens when protected from the noise of others' judgments. Jung believed that the people who became their truest selves shared one consistent characteristic. They were extraordinarily selective about what they revealed, and to whom, and when. They were not cold. They were not isolated. They had deep relationships. But they had learned the difference between genuine intimacy and the performance of openness. The deepest part of themselves stayed close, allowed to develop in the quiet dark before meeting the light. This does not mean silence forever. It means silence until the right moment, until the strength is built, until the work is done, until the goal is real, the virtue practiced, the shadow integrated, and the intuition proven by your own experience. The 4 principles Jung developed are not 4 weaknesses. They are the 4 most powerful things inside you: your shadow, the raw material of your greatest strength; your future intentions, the blueprint of your becoming; your quiet acts of goodness, the actual substance of your character; your inner knowing, your truest compass. The world will always try to pull these things out of you. It will offer social approval in exchange for your inner content. It will tell you that openness is a virtue and silence is a problem. It will make you feel that privacy is dishonesty. Jung said something different. He said that what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. The inner work you avoid will find you eventually, but that principle cuts both ways. The inner resources you protect will also find their expression in their own time, through action rather than announcement, through becoming rather than performing. You are not required to let everyone see the inside of you. You are not required to explain your darkness to people who cannot handle it. You are not required to announce your transformation before it happens. You are not required to perform your virtue for an audience. You are not required to defend your deepest knowing to people who have never sat still long enough to develop one. You are only required to do the actual work. Do it in silence. Quietly let the results speak. This is Jung's core finding, not that people are broken, not that the human mind is dangerous, but that most people, given the choice between doing the deep interior work in private or performing the appearance of it for social approval, will choose the performance every time. And that choice, made again and again, is exactly what hollows a person out. What you protect, you develop. What you announce too early, you lose forever. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.